This video is a shout out to all you folks out there who are addicted to being busy, and I know there are a lot of you. This is a real problem for nervous system and therefore overall health. So let's talk about what's actually going on in the brain with that, and therefore how can you change that pattern by rewiring your brain. This is a really important topic because it's an epidemic in our culture and to some extent, probably many countries around the world, but it seems to be the most intense and dysfunctional in the United States. Most of my clients from teenage years onward and even retirees have this nagging feeling that they just can't relax or that it's not safe to relax and just exist. Others have simply formed a brain habit of always staying busy because they've been doing it for so long. Like maybe they got into the habit when their children were young and they were trying to balance caretaking for their kids with working full time. And then once they didn't need to balance the two anymore and the kids were out of the house, then they just had no idea how to go back to being a more relaxed human the way they may have lived their lives before. I also have a lot of people who get into this habit in graduate school or the early years in their career where they're working really hard to try to advance and or build a business or whatever, and it just becomes a pattern that goes on for so long that they don't even realize sometimes that they're stuck in it and that they are doing that every day of their life now, even though they don't need to anymore. So funny enough, in these situations, it's actually uncomfortable when someone like this tries to just exist. They feel antsy or restless or like they should be doing something, even though there's nothing that urgently needs to be done. And sometimes they may feel so uncomfortable with doing nothing that they subconsciously fill their schedule with all kinds of activities and appointments that they don't really want or need to do, but they do it just to fill the space. Some people are downright afraid of relaxing, either because they think their whole world will fall apart, their life, if they're not always accomplishing something on their to-do list, or because they're afraid to be with themselves and everything that arises inside them when they are not doing or consuming. Right? So things that arise might be their emotions, their own bodily sensations, their thoughts. I'm sure you are starting to realize now that that is the primary coping mechanism of human beings is try to distract ourselves from everything that feels uncomfortable in our lives or in ourselves. This is actually one very successful method of emotional suppression. And basically, this comes down to this quote, I do so that I don't have to feel. We talk about this in the Wired for Wellness program, but feeling your emotions is a very important skill. And we need to feel, digest, and move through our emotions so that they don't fester and cause illness. Actually, whether the emotion is expressed or suppressed, it can still affect your body and cause illness. And actually, what needs to happen for that to not affect your bodily well-being is for you to actually shift states, is to acknowledge the emotion and then use something that legitimately helps you process and release it. And we have a lot of tools like that in the Wired for Wellness program. But when we don't feel our feelings about our life experience, we also tend to self-sabotage. You know, how can we be in touch with what is good or bad for us and what we truly want or don't want for ourselves when we are constantly numbing ourselves and distracting from it all the time? Yeah. Are you one of these people that is numbing with busyness? So you're going to hear this story probably in other places because I tell it a lot, but this used to be me hardcore. I drank the American Kool-Aid growing up, that being productive and high achieving and perfectionistic were the ways to be successful, as well as accepted, appreciated, and approved of by other people. No one taught me how to feel, process, and attend to my emotions. And I don't blame anyone for that because very few people actually have that skill. So after I got past the childhood phase of big emotional outbursts, and then 5 minutes later, I'm fine, and matured into emotional management and suppression, then I just started shoving things down. And what was my most successful strategy for doing that? It was distraction through busyness. Yep, I was a queen at that. As a teen, I started filling my schedule up very full early on in life with a lot of school stuff and sports and part-time jobs and social activities. Basically, I was busy from 7 a.m. to 9 at night, and then I would crash from exhaustion every night. Then when I went to college, I started having some more painful experiences, more traumas, things like that. So I filled my plate even more and I added a lab job and a long distance boyfriend. And that was on top of everything else I was already doing. When I wasn't doing homework, I was pretty much always with friends. So I was never by myself, just existing and being present with what was going on inside myself. I thought that rushing from one activity to the next, shoving food in my face whenever I could, and crashing with exhaustion at night was normal. After all, I watched my parents live this way on the treadmill of busyness, and they only stepped off of it to sleep. It never occurred to me as a young person that this might be why they were so unhappy until I became so unhappy that even busyness could not distract me from that building emotional pain. When I became so unhappy, but I continued to push on in my life, that's when my symptoms started. When I got sick, it was the first time that I actually allowed myself to consider what I wanted for my life. And it only happened because it felt like I had no choice. Up until that point, I was living my parents' dream, thinking I was going to go into research like my dad and my brother. And I hadn't taken even a moment to notice that I hated it. I was doing it the entire time I was in college, and it was so freaking boring for me. But when I took a good hard look, I was actually shocked to find out how much of my own feelings and desires I had been able to suppress and ignore very successfully for a very long time. But it did take a lot of energy to suppress all that. And even though I wasn't aware of it, the self suppression had led to more and more and more nervous system dysregulation for me. Why? Because I was stressing myself to the max to be someone I wasn't, to meet some arbitrary standard of being constantly productive and high achieving at the expense of my own happiness, enjoyment of life, and pleasure. In general, this pattern of being constantly productive, achieving, and checking boxes is stressful to our nervous systems. We were not designed for a life like that. Our hunter-gatherer ancestors, whose nervous systems are the same as ours, spent many hours a day just existing and socializing and exploring. Maybe not every day, but most days. And yes, they had to do other things. They had to make food and shelters, make clothing, and take care of children, but they did it in community. They shared the load, and in between those tasks, they just existed and they played. So, in this state of just existing and not really concentrating on anything, it's easier for our nervous systems to rest and settle into safe and social, otherwise known as rest, digest, and heal, that nervous system state that is so good for us. And in that just existing way of being, it's also easier for our brain waves to go into an alpha state where we are more imaginative and creative and very calm. This brainwave state decreases anxiety, depression, and stress. So, how do we shift this unhealthy pattern of constant busyness? So, first, I suggest you get clear on what you really want. What do you want to create? What does your ideal day or week look like in terms of how you spend your time, as well as how you feel about your life? Would you like to have an hour a day for exercise and an hour a day for doing some kind of relaxation technique? Would you like to attend to the to-do list for only an hour or two a day? Would you like to take 10-minute breaks to do nothing or calm your nervous system at work throughout the day? Would you like to spend more time being present and having fun with your loved ones? What would feel the best to you? I suggest you write this vision of your ideal down. Get really, really clear on what that is. And it may be easier for you to do this in the chunk of a day, like what is an ideal day, or it may be easier to do it in an ideal week. You may even want to do both. Why not, right? So the next thing to do is to look for the resistance your brain may be holding to living that life. Resistance can take the form of an emotional reaction to that. So like maybe you think about trying to reduce your workday by an hour a day so that you can do more exercise. If you imagine that living that way and you get anxious because now you have less time to do work and you think you won't get as much done, that is one form of resistance. Another form of resistance could be thoughts that keep going by, like, oh, that's not possible. I don't know how you think you'll have enough time in the day to do that in addition to what you already do. Or kids will never allow you to have that extra time to yourself. The other way that resistance can show up is when you imagine living your life that way, you can have a bodily sensation come up, and you may not actually be aware of what emotion may be attached to it, but your body starts to talk to you in sensation. If those sensations are uncomfortable, that is usually indicating some form of resistance. So your subconscious is speaking through your body to tell you, hey, that's not a comfortable idea, or that's not a change that feels safe. It can express that through sensations in your body via the autonomic nervous system. So if that starts to happen, notice that. That would be a form of resistance. So this resistance, whatever you notice come up, can actually be rewired. And you can do it just at that superficial level of what comes up inside you when you think about going forward. And you might want to start there because it's the easiest. But if that is not enough for you to feel comfortable making those changes in your life, then you may want to go a little deeper. Deeper means looking for where this pattern started. Why did it get going in the first place? What has reinforced it over time? Like my example from my life, it got started for me very early from my parents, just watching them live that way and assuming that that was normal. So even as a young person, I stacked my life super full, just like they did, and kept myself very busy. But it also got reinforced at certain points in my life where it felt like I had to work that hard in order to get someone's approval, or I had to work that hard in order to achieve what I wanted to with my courses or some other thing. So look for those kinds of experiences that may be fueling this pattern or may have set it up in the first place. Those experiences can also be rewired in the brain so that your brain doesn't interpret from them anymore. In order to be safe, I need to be constantly busy. Ultimately, that is at the root of this pattern for many people, is that at some point along the line, they got the impression that in order to be safe on some level, whether it was socially or in their job or with their partner or with their parents, that in order to be safe, they needed to constantly be doing. If that belief system is in there, you want to identify that. So look back at your past and go, okay, what was my childhood like? What other experiences did I have that may have set this pattern up? And what did I make those experiences mean? What might I have taken away from those experiences as belief systems about life, about myself, etc.? Some people put their sense of self-worth in how much they achieve because they've gotten lots of praise for that their whole life and not a lot of praise for anything else. So if that is the underlying belief that in order to be worthy, I need to be constantly busy and achieving, look for things like that. That's really, really, really valuable stuff, and you can rewire that too. So here are some of the other common beliefs to look for. The first one is, if I'm not always checking boxes, my life will fall apart. If I'm not always taking care of things, people will get upset with me or not value me or think I'm lazy. Uh-oh. The only way to have successful, happy life is to constantly set goals and achieve them. That sounds like the American ideal, doesn't it? Well, it is, but it has a pathological side. It can go too far and make people sick. So another common belief is I have to always be doing something for my health, like taking supplements, going to appointments, or I'll get sicker. That is not an objective truth necessarily, but if you believe that, of course, it's going to drive you to constantly be doing, doing, doing. You're just going to be doing, doing, doing in this one area of life. Some people believe that just existing is painfully boring and that they just can't do it. That's a good one to take a look at too. Some people believe that they cannot sit still because they can't stand to feel their body. Well, I can tell you that that absolutely can be neural retrained, and we help people with that every day. Many people with chronic illness are super freaked out by the symptoms in their body, but the more peace you can make with those symptoms, the more you can get really comfortable with them and not react to them, the more likely they are to actually go away. So that's a super important belief to challenge if you're sick. Some people believe their thoughts are too scary to sit with. Well, I got something for you. I can actually help you to dissipate your fear reaction to those thoughts so that they stop having any power over you. Wouldn't that be nice? Some people believe that relaxing is wasting time. Really not a good belief to hold when you actually need that relaxation time to be healthy, which I would argue everyone needs. Okay, so take a look, notice if that belief is what you're carrying. And then what emotions come up when you think about relaxing? Do you feel any guilt or anxiety or worry or shame around it? What thoughts pop into your head as you imagine relaxing? What sensations? Yeah, good. So now you have the neurological roots identified by answering these questions. And now you can take all of that to brain training processes to rewire it so that that pattern stops playing out inside you and in your life. And yes, I can tell you from being on the flip side that you can rewire this pattern. It is just a learned pattern. There's nothing else to it. You weren't born with this obsession with busyness, right? You spent a lot of time as a baby just chilling, okay? So I know this is not inherent to who you are, and you can change it. And I've helped a ton of people change it besides myself as well. So if this is you, take some action. Get yourself to the place where you can actually relax so that you can heal. All right, thanks so much for listening. I'll see you in the next video.